Hi class, my name is Nicole Guzman and I'm going to be doing case number 13 on Deepwater Horizon blowout. So a little bit of background, BP is the oil and gas company based in the UK. In 2012 it had about 84,000 employees around the globe, and before the spill it had about $14 billion in profits. It owns gas exploration rights, oil and gas fields, refineries, pipelines, and gas stations. In 2005, however, BP was held responsible for an oil refinery explosion that killed about 15 workers and injured 170. After this, OSHA found about 300 safety violations and more than 700 in a follow-up. In total, BP had to pay about $34 million in federal fines due to this. So Deepwater Horizon was located about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana. It was an exploratory well, so it operated at about a depth of 5,000 feet. However, the actual well was located 18,000 feet. So what happened? On April 20th, 2010, there was an explosion at the Deepwater Horizon, which resulted in 11 workers killed and 17 injured. The failure was caused by the blowout preventer, or the cement barriers that seal off the oil at the wellhead, and they also filter hydrocarbons. For 3 days it burned and it finally sank. After this, it leaked for 84 consecutive days, and during those days it spilled about 200 million gallons or 5 million barrels of oil and 62,000 barrels per day. So the effects it had on the coast, it was devastating. Wildlife was impacted. The economies of the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida were also impacted. There was damage to the fishing and shrimping industries, tourism, and any other companies associated with tourism. BP tried to clean this up. They first started pumping mud and concrete into the well shaft. That did not work. They tried to lower a large container over the well. That also did not work. And after a couple of more tries, in July, they finally were able to put a tight cap on, and that stopped the leak. Overall, Coast Guard directed the response with about 47,000 workers and 6,400 vessels. So whose fault was it? The initial blame was put on BP because it was contracted with other companies that built the well and operated it. However, BP shifted that blame to Transocean, which actually owned the rig and the equipment. So the first news release by BP the day after the spill stated that BP offered full support to Transocean. However, it was their fault because it was their equipment. Just as the spokesperson said, this accident took place on a rig owned, managed, and operated by Transocean. It involves the failure of a piece of their equipment, so the unfolding events do not arise as a failure of BP safety systems. However, President Obama stated that BP is responsible for the leak and they would pay the full bill. After this statement, BP continued to put the blame on Transocean and their equipment rather than owning up to the spill. So why was PR needed? PR was needed to save the face of BP, which just announced its 135% first quarter profit of $5.6 billion. So that is huge, and they wanted to save face, obviously, for those reasons too. The BP oil spill was the largest spill in history, so they would be known for that. The talk about the spill was insanely high. The spill was obviously on the top 3 stories for 14 weeks straight. It was also the top 5 most tweeted topics twice during the 14 weeks as well. So it also had a large social media presence. It made it the list of top most viewed news videos on YouTube for three times. There was also a lack of transparency regarding BP's statements and what actually was happening. They were reporting that it was about 1,000 to 5,000 gallons being spilled per day. In fact, it was 62,000. And overall, $93 million would be spent on PR for the first 3 months, which is double the amount that they would spend in 1 year. So some objectives of PR. it was to provide factual information about the spill and how BP would help clean up the damage that was done. They wanted to send apologies to the public and own up to the damage because initially they were denying that it was their fault. They wanted to restore the Gulf and everything affected by the spill, so businesses, wildlife, and the shore. They also wanted to inform their stakeholders and update the public on cleanup efforts, health, environmental, and claims issues. Strategies and tactics. CEO Tony Hayward, he offered a videotaped apology to the public. That aired on June 2nd, 2010. The advertisement included contact numbers for impacted wildlife, shorelines, claims numbers, and website addresses to government and BP information sites. However, there was backlash on it because people felt that they could have used that money for restoration purposes instead of advertisement. BP also used its social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Flickr to keep the public informed and updated. BP created a set of commercials that would air frequently on television and YouTube. They were called Voices of the Gulf and My Gulf. These commercials features interviewed with locals and how BP was aiding in cleaning and restoration. So they would interview locals and they would get their story and make it personal. After 38 days, BP installed a live stream video that monitored and allowed people to view the spill and what was happening around it. So some measurements. 9 days after the explosion, BP created a separate Twitter account that would handle all the tweets related to the spill, and that was at Oil Spill 2010. About 1,142 tweets were transmitted between April 29th and September 19th, 2010. Many of these included links to websites, news articles, press releases, and government reports. A YouTube episode, Voices from the Gulf, it generated about 142,478 views. Their video titled BP Gulf of Mexico Response Claims received 289,131 views because of Darrell Willis's credibility, because he worked for BP. However, he was a local, so people took the video more seriously. The commercial as well, BP Gulf Coast Update, Our Ongoing Commitment, racked up more than a million views on YouTube. So their presence was large and people were obviously listening to their messages. However, what did and didn't work, the YouTube videos created a sense of community and familiarity, and the views were incredibly high. They were high quality, featuring BP workers, citizens of the Gulf, BP officials, and volunteers. However, their presence on social media was huge, but on Facebook they failed to use a two-way communication tool, which restricted them to only posting updates such as photos, links to articles, and updates. However, they did not allow people to have communication with them, which is basically the only way someone can contact them directly and get a response quickly. So again, honesty is the best policy. At first, BP estimated that there was only about 1,000 barrels leaking into the ocean. That number escalated to 5,000 9 days later. A month later, it was discovered that 60,000 barrels a day were being leaked into the ocean. These statements resulted in BP being fined about $525 million for misleading investors and the public, which obviously did not work. In the beginning, they did try to save face by downsizing the numbers. However, that only backlashed on them. Backfired. What would I have done differently? I would have engaged with the audience on social media platforms more, provided the truth from the beginning to avoid more of a damaged reputation. No one likes it when you lie. Obviously owned up to the spill and have a solid crisis management plan in case anything like this happens again. It seemed like they did not know how to handle this spill at all. They were all over the place with the news. They kept changing their story. So 9 years later, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Projects expanded. They are actually conserving about 100,000 acres of coastal habitats. And BP paid $100 million for causing the death of the birds. These funds have actually been used to protect and restore about 350,000 acres that are beneficial to both humans and animals. So some discussion questions. Why do you think that BP initially put the blame on Transocean? Was it to really save face, or was it because of their stakeholders? Was their social media PR presence enough? Did they do enough on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube? What are some precautions that BP's crisis management team can take in case this happens again? And these are my references.